looming environmental nuclear bomb in
Salt Lake
Utah.
City, Utah is facing a climate crisis as
The
its
lake may be losing some of the features that makes it
The
great.
drying up of the Great Salt Lake is beginning to have significant economic consequences.
Scientists have long speculated that climate change is to blame for the drying up of the world's salty lakes. A new study identifies another probable culprit: thirsty humans. According to almost 170 years of water records and a study of how much water flows in and out of the Salt Lake, freshwater consumption is likely to be to blame for the shrinking of Utah's Great Salt Lake and similar lakes around the world. The Great Salt Lake has continuously declined since 1847, reaching its lowest recorded level in 2016. The lake is now 3.6 meters lower than it was in 1847, with only half of its original volume. As a climate change-fueled mega-drought grips the West, the Great Salt Lake in Utah has plunged to its lowest level on record for the second time.
The water level has now fallen to historic lows, the lowest since 1847. And the consequences will not be limited to the marine ecology, but the livelihoods of the state and beyond.
According to US Geological Survey data, the lake's surface water elevation fell to 4,190, 1 foot lower than the previous record set in 2021, and the lowest it has ever been since it was initially observed in the mid-1800s. The lake's previous low point was 4,191.4 feet in October 1963. The lake's shrinkage endangers millions of migrating birds and a lake-based industry worth an estimated $1.3 billion in mineral mining, brine shrimp, and recreation. There are also health risks. The vast, dry lake bed might release arsenic-laced dust into the air that millions of people breathe. Salts and silt can become airborne as the lake bed is exposed, causing respiratory and cardiovascular difficulties. Humans are the only ones who are affected, which account for about a quarter of all such bodies of water on the planet, support diverse ecosystems for plants and animals such as brine shrimp and the endangered peregrine falcon. They also provide a haven for migrating birds, many of whom gorge themselves on brine shrimp before and during their long trips. So how could Salt Lake's low levels wipe out almost 10% of the US economy? Water officials claim that evaporation and depletion have exceeded the volume of water entering the lake. The shrinking Great Salt Lake has many possible repercussions, mainly on the economy. According to a governmental study, the Great Salt Lake generates $1.3 billion in the annual economy through the mineral, harvest, and recreation industries. If the lake continues to dry up, the annual economic cost would range between $1.7 billion and $2.2 billion. Since the lake supports around 7,000 employment in the local economy, at least 6,500 people in Utah could lose their jobs if the lake dried up. The worst case scenario for Utah's diminishing Great Salt Lake may be witnessed 600 miles southwest in California at the Owens Lake Basin. According to a 2020 research, Los Angeles County finally spent roughly $2.5 billion in dust mitigation efforts after Owens Lake dried up decades ago, decimating the local economy and causing some of the worst levels of dust pollution in the United States. Now, companies that rely on the Great Salt Lake must adjust, such as the mineral extraction industry, which generates around $1.3 billion in yearly economic output. The drying lake is also harming an important industry for the local economy, as well as your personal seafood consumption. This lake produces 45% of the world's brine shrimp, which are used to breed fish and shrimp in aquaculture plants around the world. The world-famous ski resorts in the mountains surrounding the Great Salt Lake are also bracing for changes in the winter. The lake benefits neighbouring ski resorts by affecting local climate and weather, resulting in lake-effect snowstorms. If evaporation continues and lake-effect snow declines, Utah's ski season might be cut short, costing the sector up to $9.6 million each year. Lower water levels means fewer boats in the marina, which means less revenue for recreation and tourism. The dry lake bed, which spews deadly dust into the air that millions breathe, is perhaps the most concerning for the region's 1.2 million residents. According to a 2019 study by the University of Utah, the lake bed contains arsenic and other harmful heavy metals. The state might spend more than $330 million on dust control measures over the next 20 years, much of it from mining activity in the region. There is no single solution to the Big Salt Lake's decreasing water levels. Saving the lake would necessitate allowing more snow melts from the mountains to flow into the basin, resulting in less water for people and farmers. But Salt Lake City already has insufficient water to meet its population's long-term demands. According to a report commissioned by the Utah legislature, the state's demand for water will outstrip the supply by 2040. Salt Lake City stopped issuing licenses for firms that require a lot of water, such as data centers or bottling plants, in December. Raising the price of water could also boost conservation efforts. From an economic standpoint, the consequences might be rather significant. We've also seen, with drying terminal lakes around the world, that respiratory sickness rises as lake levels fall because people breathe in more of the particulate matter in the air that's flying around. But the main problem is being born at the bed of the lake. What is it? Terminal lakes, such as the Great Salt Lake, have water that can flow into but not out of the basin. When strong winds blow over a drying lake bed, they whip up small particles that can be breathed, causing lung damage and exacerbating other respiratory illnesses. These contaminants have been related to a variety of health issues. Although the Great Salt Lake isn't a reservoir like the quickly dwindling Lake Mead and Lake Powell, it's still a valuable natural resource and an excellent incentive for people to save water, especially given how much Utah's population has grown in the previous decade. As the environment warms, dries, and winds pick up, many lakes in the West will see increased evaporation and water loss. Because of the reality unfolding in the Great Salt Lake, many state authorities have turned their attention to developing measures to adapt to or lessen the disaster. In recent years, researchers discovered that metals and pollutants deposited into Great Salt Lake's tributaries not only flow into the lake, but also become lodged in the lake bed. According to a new study, this isn't just a problem when the lake bed is exposed. The metal is also ending up in the Great Salt Lake's essential ecosystem. Decades of industrial activity, like the Kennecott mine, immediately south of the Great Salt Lake, have resulted in a wide range of toxic substances winding up in the lake. These include arsenic, cadmium, copper, mercury, and selenium, all of which were detected in prior lakebed research. According to USU researchers, these chemicals and metals have a high degree of toxicity and are capable of causing organ failure and several types of cancer. This research raised concerns about the Great Salt Lake drying because winds can pick up the particles and blow them into the towns east of the lake. The researchers wanted to determine if this problem affected the enormous Great Salt Lake ecology. They discovered that plants absorbed the chemicals and metals, mostly retaining them in their roots. Certain poisons were found in higher concentrations both below and above ground. Almost all plants stored selenium and arsenic below ground, but invasive phragmites had the highest proportions of lead and mercury in their seeds. For example, the 3 native bulrush species contained high levels of copper above ground, as well as high quantities of arsenic and lead. Cadmium, copper, and lead levels were all observed in invertebrates such as spiders, caterpillars, and dragonflies in these areas, according to researchers. Copper and cadmium levels in these insects were said to be around 10 times greater than in wetland plants. The presence of metals in natural ecosystems, such as what the researchers uncovered in the Great Salt Lake, presents health risks for both animals and humans, according to the researchers. Every year, an estimated 10 million birds live in the Great Salt Lake wetlands, either year-round or during migration, many of which graze on plant seeds and invertebrates. While the findings are concerning, researchers believe they also provide a feasible blueprint for cleaning up the lake. According to ecologists, if metals can be fixed below ground, fewer opportunities for these metals to travel through the food webs will exist. Wetland plants can also help with this process since they can absorb metals discharged into the lake. According to the study of several plant species, many metals are excluded by these plants, which sequester them in below-ground tissues. Land management organizations may consider preserving root systems by just cutting the above-ground parts of plants and burying those parts in low-impact sites as a short-term solution to the problem. The researchers also stated that reducing invasive phragmites biomass may reduce lead and other metal transmission, while delivering additional ecosystem advantages. The researchers eventually determined that the complexity of how different plants react to chemicals and metals means that future plant management plans must be carefully crafted. Keeping Great Salt Lake water levels as high as feasible is also important for decreasing exposure to the lake's hazardous constituents. According to the Utah Division of Forestry, Fire and State Lands, the lake will drop another 2 feet this year to a new all-time low, exposing hundreds of new acres of the lake bed. A toxic threat veiled in dust. How badly would it affect humans? Dust storms are common in Salt Lake County, Utah. They originate in the lake and nearby playas and spread hundreds of miles. Because toxic metals are transported to metropolitan areas, they may have a harmful influence on air quality and human health. The particles have the potential to spread across Salt Lake County's surfaces, settling on streets, buildings, schools, and parks. Toxic metals attached to dust particles can enter the human body by eating, inhalation, and skin absorption, causing a variety of disorders. Arsenic and other harmful metals build up in the human body, including the bloodstream, fatty tissues, hair, nails, and teeth. toxic metals in urban dust can induce carcinogenic diseases such as skin cancer, lung cancer, and kidney cancer, and non-carcinogenic problems such as damage to the central nervous and human circulatory systems, anemia, and gastrointestinal disorders due to their high toxicity and non-degradability. Kevin Perry, a professor of atmospheric sciences at the University of Utah, collected 16,000 soil samples from the lakebed for a revolutionary study. The results are terrifying. They show a high level of concentration of 9 hazardous elements, including arsenic. Toxins appear in areas connected with anthropogenic activity, such as industrial and agricultural wastewater discharge. According to a study conducted by the University of Utah's School of Medicine, arsenic and lead levels in lakebed silt have considerably grown since the 1980s due to the lakes drying up.
We